Hello and welcome to this latest episode of Hospitality Talks. My name is Blake Gladman and I am Strategy and Insight Director at CAM, and I'm joined here by Mark Bentley, Business Development Director at HDI. And together we are going to be discussing the findings from our latest report that we've produced in partnership with the BII called the Pub Roadmap. Thank you also to our sponsors Breaks and Brixton Brewery for their support with this particular report. But for this particular report, we did some work alongside HDI in terms of pulling out some particular data to help set the scene for the sector. So Mark's here with me today to talk a little bit about that data and also some of the sort of wider implications of the results that we found in part of this research. So Mark, hello and welcome.
Yeah, hi Blake, good to see you.
You too. Do you want to just maybe introduce HDI and tell the viewers just a little bit about what you guys do and also how then you've kind of worked together with us to produce some data for this particular report?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So HDI Hospitality Data Insights. So we're the leading provider of card spending insight and market pricing data to the hospitality sector. Work with a whole range of different businesses, from operators and also kind of suppliers to the sector. Our card spending data is an incredible kind of data source, actually. So we see the spending of 10.2 million people, and we're able to kind of track the debit and credit card spending of 10.2 million people across about 180,000 different venues, all the way across hospitality. So what that enables us very accurately to do is to report on the total hospitality market, but also to go all the way down to individual venue level or look at what's happening in particular local areas. So in terms of that data source for the report, we've been able to look at a broad view really across hospitality, look at who's spending what and where and how things are changing over the last year. The other data source that we have is market pricing data. So we've got about 15,000 venues across hospitality, full product by product, site by site, details of food and drink, pricing and sort of listing on people's menus. So there's some insights there from the managed pubs part of that data set, looking at the structure of draft beer product ranges and how that's changing over time, and some of the big trends that we're able to kind of pull out, and as a result of how we're seeing people's product ranges kind of evolve over the last year, really.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And certainly some of the data that you provided has already helped us to sort of set the scene, I guess, for this report in terms of kind of how that sort of share of spend is looking across hospitality as a whole, and kind of where then pubs fit in that mix across restaurants, delivery, fast food, etc. So what was interesting for you about kind of where that share of spend is with pubs and how that's kind of evolved maybe over the last kind of couple of years?
Yeah, I think we all hear a lot at the moment around cost of living crisis. We've had an unprecedented few years, really, sort of with the pandemic and then everything that's followed in terms of changing people's working habits, much more remote working, hybrid working kind of being the norm now. And I think for me, the really interesting thing was to look at the shape of the hospitality sector overall in terms of where people are spending their money and actually see what's happening year on year. And we know there has been some very significant shifts. Certainly, if we kind of go back to 2019. But what we're seeing now is the market seems to be stabilizing and seems to be kind of settling down. So very much going to get a sense that the shape of the hospitality sector that we have today, is the base. That is our new normal. That is kind of about where things are going to be kind of trending out, kind of in the years ahead.
Yeah.
So I think probably kind of compared to some of the upheaval and major challenges that we've had to face in recent years, probably now looking at the market from a much more kind of positive perspective, that it feels like there's a lot more stability, and actually businesses now can see what it is that they've got, and then start to plan from a much more stable base.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's almost like, I guess obviously it's been quite tumultuous last few years, but it feels like the data suggests that, as you said, there's a bit of a leveling out, and actually a bit more kind of basis for confidence. Obviously it's still a tough time, but in terms of kind of confident that what you do now, won't necessarily be impacted by other kind of big changes. It's more of a case of seeing that play out. Is that kind of how you read it?
Yeah, we can certainly live in hope. I mean,
Yeah,
we don't want any repeat of the challenges that we have kind of faced in kind of recent years, but
yeah,
certainly looking at the data, it does feel like now we're in a much more kind of stable position,
yeah,
and hopefully that enables people to start to plan, and look ahead kind of much more optimistically for the future. I think we kind of see in the news now things like inflation kind of starting to kind of come down.
yeah,
We see that as with the market pricing data that's included in the report as well.
yeah,
I mean, the big challenge is, prices are still going up, so it is still more expensive to kind of to go out.
yeah,
So we can't, ignore that fact. But we have kind of been facing very significant, double-digit inflation, and then we're now seeing that ease and starting to kind of become sort of lower single digits. So I think
yeah,
things are moving, in the right direction, but we're certainly not out of the woods yet, really, in terms of the challenges that are facing the industry.
yeah. And then how is that kind of leveling out playing? Because another sort of interesting part of the data that you've included in the report is around the breakdown of spend by age group and gender within pubs specifically. So how again is that? Are you sort of seeing a similar sort of trend in terms of how that kind of spend data is showing year on year?
Yeah, I think if we go back to sort of post-pandemic, what we saw it was that younger people were kind of like the first to return, and probably more men kind of returning kind of in the early days. Actually, what we're now seeing in the data, it's subtle shifts, but
Mm-hmm.
we are seeing, in terms of the proportion of spend from different age groups, we're seeing sort of 35 pluses now representing kind of a bigger proportion of spend, in pubs kind of now versus a year ago. And we're seeing a slight increase in the proportion of spend that's coming through from women. So it, all of that really kind of goes back to the point we kind of made at the start about things starting to settle down, feeling like we've got things returning to a degree of normal, whatever normal is.
Yeah,
So I think encouraging to see the trends that are kind of playing out in the market, really.
yeah. And what's your, because obviously the sort of spend falling with that kind of younger age group, is there anything particular that you kind of think is driving that?
I think it's more a reflection of the proportion of spend. So it's looking at
Okay.
the makeup of spend in pubs and bars. I mean, if we look at it, it's 18 to 34s, about 2% kind of down in terms of their kind of spend contribution. But that's because then we're seeing the older kind of age groups kind of becoming kind of more engaged and more active. So
Yeah.
it's not something I would be particularly kind of concerned about, from a younger age group perspective. I mean, that said, we do hear a lot about how socializing kind of patterns have changed.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing now a lot less night, kind of, a lot less late night
Yeah.
activity. So it's quite well publicised. There are people who are very reliant on that kind of late night sector, and have had some kind of key challenges,
Yeah.
occasions almost kind of shifting kind of earlier in the day, and there has been that element of occasions being sort of closer to home as well. So with
Yeah.
people kind of in cities and things, kind of we work less often than those occasions have suffered. But again, we have been seeing that bounce back. So we have been seeing, only to read the trade press recently, kind of big London operators reporting very positive numbers, really, in terms of how their inner London sites are performing, as an example.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess some of the so obviously within the rest of the report, we kind of tap into sort of some of the kind of key trends that are impacting the pub sector, in particular, kind of some of the macro trends around sustainability, the growth in demand for kind of local provenance, as well as some of the other trends, particularly for the sector around kind of premiumization, personalization, and I guess where then pubs fit compared to maybe some of those other kind of competitive spaces around sort of casual dining, QSRs, but also at home as well, sort of delivery, in terms of the ability a lot of these venues have to sort of tap into some of those trends. And I'm interested because you shared a case study in the report around the beer category in particular, and I guess be interested to know your view and what the data is saying in terms of how that category, for example, is kind of in line with maybe these trends, or where there maybe are opportunities as well for pub operators.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really interesting one when you look at some of the big trends that we've been seeing, in drinks kind of in recent years,
Yeah.
especially when set against cost of living crisis, when everyone would have thought that actually people's budgets have been squeezed, and actually then people maybe look to kind of trade down. But actually, over the pandemic, we saw a massive acceleration in premiumization trends. So if we look at the lager category, your standard lagers, your sort of Carling, Fosters, Carlsbergs of the world, were brands that are massively important from a volume and value perspective, but had been in longer term decline. And we started to see a real growth in sort of world lagers. So the your sort of Mediterranean lagers, like your Peronis, Brumarettis, and obviously Madrid, which was a new entrant kind of back end of 2020. But really, like what we kind of saw in the beer category was a huge acceleration of the decline in the familiar favourites, the standard lagers, and massive growth in world lagers. And pretty much all of the other kind of sectors of that lager category remained as they were, really, in terms of their proportion of the sales mix. And that hasn't shown any sign of slowing down, over kind of like recent years. And I think there's very much a piece where actually when people are going out, there's that phrase around drinking less but drinking better. People are prepared to pay more for brands that they perceive as high quality, that have a certain kind of image and kind of style associated with them. And I think it's a really fascinating one against the backdrop of cost of living pressures, kind of all the kind of rising costs and everything else. Actually, that when people go out, they're willing to trade up, they're willing to pay more for quality. And world lager has been a real kind of key example of that. We've also seen the phenomenal growth of craft beer, led by Beavertown Neck Oil, kind of a session IPA, as just an absolute phenomenal performance, really, in recent years. But when I look at the success of something like a Neck Oil, it's because as a session IPA, in that sort of 4.5% kind of ABV range, it's absolutely on the money for the needs of what people are looking for when they're in pubs. Some of the craft brands that have been there in the past have been higher strength ABVs, which, generally speaking, when people are in a pub, they have more serves per occasion than when they're kind of drinking at home. So the pub world has always been a little bit geared to lower ABV, whereas kind of at home it tends to be higher. And I think Neck Oil is a brand that it looks great, but it also it meets the requirements of those on-trade occasions, and it's everything lining up really in terms of a brand that looks good, it tastes good, but actually then it plays to the trends and what people are looking for, which is those more premium kind of aspirational brands, but actually appropriate to the occasions in the on-trade.
It is really interesting because it's kind of, and again, it's really interesting again how kind of your data at HDI complements the consumer research that Cam have done for this report as well, in terms of consumers are telling us that they are looking for quality over quantity when it comes to both drinks and food, and in a way that again sort of resonates with the increase in this demand for kind of an experience-led occasion. So how can it be differentiated as far away from what you can replicate either at home or through takeaway, for example, and certainly with the food, people are looking for experiences or dishes that are just a little bit above what they would traditionally have at home, and also with drinks as well. So obviously draft in particular, but as you say, those kind of slightly more premium offers that again just elevate that experience beyond a kind of everyday occasion. It certainly is kind of almost those little treats that kind of as the way that sort of people sort of view it now, and we're certainly seeing an increase in demand from that from the consumer perspective as well. So it's really interesting that the kind of data you have kind of mirrors that, which suggests that is a trend that we are seeing play out in reality. Finally, I guess, what's kind of outside of the data that you provided in just the wider report in general, what kind of things interest or surprised you or interest you, or what's kind of your big sort of takeout, I guess?
I think the biggest thing for me that stood out is the importance of delivering great customer experiences. Whether that's, there's some great examples kind of in the report, talking about events, competitive socializing, live sport, live music, etc. But for me, like, we know that people's household budgets are kind of being squeezed. It's always been the case that pubs are competing with the sofa.
Yeah.
We need to provide people with compelling reasons to get off the sofa and kind of get down to the pub.
Yeah.
And there's so many kind of positives about pubs. Is the role they play at the heart of kind of local communities, bringing people together. The atmosphere. There's so many things that you just can't replicate at home. Where the pub can really deliver. That I think for me, it's more important than ever in the current times that people are really thinking about how do you elevate that experience, how do you provide those compelling reasons to visit. I think it comes through in the report really, really clearly.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, Mark. It's been great chatting, and hopefully the audience will learn a little bit more about kind of what you guys do. And thank you again for your support with with producing this report. If you are watching and you're interested in getting hold of a copy of the report, then there will be a link, I'm sure, somewhere either above or below where you're watching this video. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.